Hello everyone and welcome back into another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name as your host is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in on another chilly Thursday afternoon here in the tri-state area. But for today's show, we have a great one ahead, talking a little bit all things football here, mixed in with the first ever hockey segment as well. We'll be talking about, of course, the Jets' hiring of Aaron Glenn and the impact it will have on both the Jets and the Lions, now down two of their best coaching minds and coordinators. We're looking at the All-Rookie and All-America offenses that ESPN just released and analyzing those as well. A lot of interesting players and storylines to look at there. We're going to be, of course, going to have to recap that Texans-Chiefs game, even though a lot of people are mad at it still. But it's the last divisional round recap we are going to do here on the show. And then for our first ever hockey segment, we want to do a nice little power rankings, assess the state of the NHL as it reaches its midway point, and look at some of the top Stanley Cup contenders along the way. But as always, before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show if you want to keep up with all of our content, not just from my show as well, but around the network, all the shows happening around here. But if you do want to contribute, interact with our shows a little bit more directly while we are live streaming, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. As always, a great way to get your opinions, your input, your feedback on air. You can also do it through our website, GSMCpodcast.net. It is generally appreciated by all concerned here at the network, and it just makes our shows that much better. We truly thank you for all you do. But without further ado, let us jump into our first segment of the day, talking about that final divisional round game left to talk about, the Texans-Chiefs game. And I know a lot of people might want to talk about it. They're still fuming about the outcome of this one, but it's still necessary to talk about, as the Chiefs are a team that are a force to be reckoned with, and they've just proved it time and time again. And that was the difference in this one against a Houston team that didn't play all that terribly, but made too many countless errors, both in the red zone, on special teams, what have you, to stay in this one at Arrowhead. But ultimately, I do think that this win cemented the Chiefs as a team that no matter what happens, always feel like they got a shot. It's going to be a good one in Arrowhead on Sunday, yet again against the Bills. And let's break down the outcome of this one. The Chiefs did run out 23-14 winners, but I want to talk about some key players, some key moments as always, and further analyze this one. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting off with the magic of the Chiefs. No matter what happens, come postseason time, the Chiefs lock in, and all their players become these supernatural powerhouses who just annihilate teams no matter what, and they don't care about the final scoreline, right? This 23-14 scoreline sure looks a lot closer than you might think, but this was a true and utter annihilation. And yes, you can say the Texans were very much in this game late in the fourth quarter, but because of the potency of this Chiefs defense combined with the efficiency of the Chiefs offense in those clutch situations, it was just too much for Houston to overcome. And this was a Houston team, remember, that yes, got a unexpected win in the wild card round at home against LA, but really have not played very well against elite teams this year, and really have looked more like paper tigers than the Super Bowl contenders we thought they were going to be. So it was more of that Houston vibe than the one that we saw in Los Angeles. But that does not mean that this Houston team did not play an overall pretty solid game. Let's talk about the Chiefs first and foremost. Let's talk about how effective someone like a Travis Kelce is. 7 receptions, 117 yards, 1 touchdown. He's putting up Jerry Rice-like numbers, only second to him in terms of postseason receiving yards, receptions, and what have you. He is just someone who elevates his game, no matter how his regular season went, for the big stages. And in this one, I ultimately believe he was the difference. He was just able to exploit this Texans defense over the middle, not necessarily going up against the solid cover corners that they have in Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter, and really opening up many different avenues for Patrick Mahomes as kind of a safety blanket. And so that's what makes a huge difference if you're the Chiefs in the postseason. Having a player like Travis Kelce, who has the playoff experience, the playoff knowledge, and ultimately that connection with Mahomes, to really understand what it takes to perform on the big stage. And that's what they do time and time again, no matter the opponent, no matter the nature of the game, no matter the flow of the game, they always seem to connect at the most important moments. And that crazy touchdown ultimately was the difference, right? The one where Mahomes was nearly going to get sacked, then he flings it to Travis in the back of the end zone, and that was the ball game. So something that a lot of teams are going to have to try and figure out, because you don't want a guy like Travis Kelce getting going if you're Buffalo or Washington or Philly once they get to the Super Bowl, if they get to the Super Bowl, because that connection is almost more than enough to frustrate a team, because you do the best that you can do on the outside, and the Texans are one of the best teams in playing man-to-man on the outside with their guys in Stingley and Lassiter. They really, I thought, did an effective enough job to slow down guys like Worthy and Hopkins, but you have to account for Travis Kelce's intelligence. He may not be the fastest anymore. He may not be the strongest, but he's still savvy, and he still is Mahomes' favorite weapon. So any opponent that the Chiefs face from here on out in the postseason, not just this year, but many years to come, because if you know they're going to be here always, you have to account for Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Or, once Kelce retires, another weapon that steps up for the Chiefs as well. But then, in terms of the Chiefs' defense, that's where I feel like Houston could have done a bit better in preparing for this game. I feel like Steve Spagnuolo really understood the assignment. I think he really understood that if you put pressure on this Texans offensive line, they'll break. And so I feel like he was able to do an effective job of bringing out the best, not just of these edge rushers, but in the interior. And that's the reason why I think George Karlaftis had such a good game. 3 of their 8 sacks, including some very vital ones down the stretch in the fourth quarter. And I do think that going up against the Bills, it's going to be a tougher task, because the Bills are going to want to implement the running game a little bit more than, say, the Texans were able to. So look for the interior of this Chiefs defensive line to really be the X factor in whether or not they can ultimately get to the Super Bowl and win it. Because that game plan by Steve Spagnuolo was pure postseason tactical understanding. It's the game plan of someone who's been in the situation before and understands what he needs from his defensive unit. And then ultimately combine that with the complementary nature of this offense that was just able to produce enough, and it really frustrated this Texans team. So ultimately, congratulations to the Chiefs, even though there are going to be many discussions and debates to come over whether or not they had calls go their way in this one and for the rest of the postseason. I'm not willing to indulge in that. It's just the fact that they are a team that finds ways to win, and that's all you need to do in the postseason, no matter how you do it. And the Texans side of things, like I said, this wasn't necessarily a terrible game from them. I thought CJ Stroud played pretty well for how much the Chiefs were really pressuring and blitzing him. He was 19 to 28, 245 yards. He made some timely throws, but ultimately the problems arose in the red zone. Ultimately, when the offensive line started to weaken, ultimately where special teams failures really happened, with Ka'imi Fairbairn missing those couple field goals, and then where most of CJ Stroud's most heartbreaking, embarrassing sacks took place, because right then and there in the fourth quarter, Houston was making this a game. It was theirs to be had, really, if they could just march on the field and put it in the end zone. And they got to the red zone. They were able to sustain a couple drives, but ultimately Stroud and this offensive line struggled to punch it in. And then you look at the lack of a run game, really, after a certain point. Joe Mixon did have a decent game, but even in the fourth quarter, when critical moments, you expected more out of him after he had such a good first half. But ultimately, the moral of this game for Houston is that you can't go into next season not knowing the status of your offensive line. They've had a lot of shuffling around to do. They've had a lot of different guys go in, go out, but no kind of cohesion, no cohesiveness to really build a foundation on for next year. That's the reason why they regressed to the mean a little bit this year as well. They really could not protect Stroud. He got sacked way more than his rookie year, and ultimately saw his own numbers decline as a result. And also as a result, Joe Mixon, who looked really promising at the start of the year, saw his numbers decline as the year went on, and lack of trust in the run game ultimately led to stagnation in the pass game as well. And those injuries to Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell didn't help out either. So I really think there are going to be a lot of questions asked of this offensive line. They have to be answered immediately, or else this Texans team is not going to fulfill the dreams they had in Stroud's rookie season when they were really thinking of being true Super Bowl contenders in the AFC. Right now, the only team in NFL history, and yes, they're one of the newest, but still the only team in NFL history to not reach a championship game. And in order to do that, you have to build the trenches. And they did it very well at their defensive line. I thought they played very well in this game as well. But that offensive line is the difference between them and the AFC's elite. And if you want to beat teams like the Chiefs, especially on the road, you have to match them toe-to-toe, and it comes in the trenches because they've got you beat in most areas in that regard. That defensive line immediately clears this Texans offensive line. So if you want that to be compensated for, you're going to have to go out in free agency, the draft, and find your guys. But other than that, it really was a pretty solid effort for what we thought they were going to look like coming into this game, but ultimately not enough on the road at Arrowhead against this Chiefs team. So make of it what you will. I'm not going to indulge all those bad calls that people are debating about, but still, it's an interesting game that I really wanted to touch upon as my last game of the week. Let me know what you think in the comments, because coming next, we're going to be assessing ESPN's all-rookie team on the offensive side of the football. Maybe we get to talk with the defenses as well, but it should be an interesting segment looking at all these astonishing rookies on the offensive side of the football this season, especially in light of the AP, finalists for all these NFL awards coming out today. So it should be a good one. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about it.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?